All
right. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is the Washington State Building Code Council IBC Technical Advisory Group for October 23rd, 2025. Please take roll.
Todd Byerther,
Here.
Roger Haringa, I'm not seen in the audience. Joe Mayo,
Here.
thank you. Che Fortaleza, not seen online. Tim Woodard, not seen online. Steve Belzak, I see you online, Steve. I'll return to you. Lance Dahl, not seen online. Hoyt Jeter, not seen online. Sean Karlstrom,
Here.
thank you. Todd Sullivan, not seen online. William Mybush, not seen online. Brian Horseman, not online. Josh Mergens, not seeing online. Trent Tinney, not seeing. Michael Shaw, not seeing. Brett Conway, not online. Michael Barth,
I'm here.
thank you. Leah Summer, not seeing online. I see Che Fortaleza just joined us.
Present.
Thank you. Paul Clark,
Here.
thank you. Andy Leonto, I'm not seeing online. And going back, Steve Belzak. I didn't hear anything from you, Steve. I see you unmuted though, but we're not hearing anything from you. Steve is still not hearing you. But just for purposes of the meeting, Todd, we are sitting shy of a quorum by 2 representatives, and we'll monitor folks as they trickle in to see if we can
Okay.
get there.
Okay, we'll get there. Thank you. Anyone else like to be recognized? Patrick?
Yes, thank you. This is Patrick Hanks with the Building Industry Association of Washington.
Welcome. Good to see you. Okay, seeing no other hands and without quorum, we're just going to move right into our agenda item 4 and start keep moving on our emergency shelters standards.
All right, so we didn't discuss this topic at our last meeting. We did touch on it at our meeting previous, and we didn't have a ton of stuff there as far as what we're doing here today. So what I have to admit that I missed getting some of the documents I had ready for this meeting posted in time for the meeting. I just noticed that they weren't up here right before the meeting. So if we go to the website, there's 3 new documents on there that weren't on there about 30 minutes ago. And so I have our topic summary, which was posted on the temporary emergency shelters page created underneath the IBC tag page. But I got some documents from Steve Belzak and Hoyt Jeter in the interim. One is there's just some thoughts that they have on temporary emergency housing standards. And so since Steve, you're in the room, I'm hoping that your mic might be working, and I'd like to pop open your concept proposal and kind of open the discussion there. And if your mic is unmuted, I guess let's try it.
Did you say Steve?
Yes, sir.
Was that okay? Well, as Steve's maybe coming on there, I see him in there, but maybe we'll just kind of frame this again and where we left this. So last week we were working on the dwelling unit size. Now we're going to alternate back and forth as we kind of sprint every week here and touch a little bit on the emergency shelters. Where we left in my memory was we were still trying to kind of come to a definition. We had a good discussion about it. I think we kind of laid out there our current understanding and questions of what we're trying to do. We were going to get a little more intent from the legislature to understand this, and people are going to bring forward some and talk a little bit more what current cities are doing and what examples exist out there. So I think that was kind of our overall intent today was, and that can just be a discussion, that can be bringing things forward like Dustin has provided. But after we've all had a couple weeks to chew on this a little bit, that was the intent to come back. Steve, did you want to take that bait there, or maybe not in a good position to do that? I think he dropped off trying to correct some
Yeah, he's probably trying to log back in. I can pop it open and talk about it. The other one I had from Hoyt is available as well, but since I don't see him on, and he does kind of join us a little bit, like 10 or so minutes in, has been kind of lately. I'm expecting him here. I didn't get a decline from him.
Okay, let's bring them up and then just get people's thoughts about it. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I won't speak for Hoyt, but I know that the ICC code hearings are going on right now, and I did see him testify yesterday. So I imagine he and other code folks are probably pretty involved in that today.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Now that you mentioned it, I forgot. He mentioned he would be in there, but he was hoping to be able to pop out for this meeting.
Hi, Ardell.
That's where everyone is. We're all at ICC. So Micah, John, Sue, wait. So just that's correct.
And we don't want to distract anyone there from those efforts. So so again, if we can make this a little shorter day if needed, and but I think we want to make sure we give everybody the opportunity to come back and keep moving, and so we can point this thing in a certain direction.
And I have Josh Mergens just joined us.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you, Dustin.
Okay. Well, with that, I don't want to delay anyone. Just open the floor to anyone as we're bringing up these two examples.
All right, so what I have here is, I guess it should be seeing my screen now, is just a kind of some commentary on indigent housing from Steve Belzak. And just scan in, I see him back online. And Steve, if you get your mic working, pop on at any point and just let us know it's working. And I'll do my best to run through this one and we can open conversation from there. But he's referencing 1927042. Let me pop that one open as well. This is cities and counties. This is where our task is couched in our SBCC RCW. So conditions limited to existing build. This is, I guess, his concept of what we should be thinking about, that we should limit this to existing buildings, not open up a avenue for new construction for well, this is conditions for what we have in the statute right now. Sorry. And Steve, are you live yet?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, perfect. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what happened.
It's
But
technology.
yeah, I
It's designed
apologize
to
for
work, but it doesn't want to. So
yeah, sometimes that's how it is. What I was trying to do with this proposal is just get down to the real baseline, the very basics of what would be required. And I guess my thought process was, if I'm living on the sidewalk on the street with a tarp over my back, what anything would be better, right? And what would be the minimum that we would want to see that would make it a better condition for these kind of folks, right? That's kind of what we're after. I didn't want to go way into the weeds with a lot of different requirements, new requirements that would make it prohibitive for this to happen. And like I say, maybe this is a primitive approach, but that was kind of what I was thinking, with just the bare minimum, which is, I think, the intent of the legislature. They're trying to open this up so that more, more opportunities will arise for the folks that are homeless. One thing I did not address, though, that I probably should have, was sanitation. And I don't know if that could be done maybe with porta potties or whatever. I'm thinking you might be more hazardous being in a building with people, defecating inside the building rather than outside in the clean, fresh air above the sidewalk. But nonetheless, other than that, I was just trying to bring it back, kind of ground it, get it down to the very basics. And hopefully that you can all build on that if you'd like. That's just my take on it. So thanks for hearing me out.
thank you, Steve. So, this is where he's pointing out in his concept is anything that is above the standard of being on the street with a blanket over your head is better than that. So, safer and healthier for indigent people. And are there any thoughts on the sanitation aspects of these buildings from the group?
Well, I'll jump in and thank you, Steve. I think we started to address this a little bit a couple weeks ago, and Ardell and others did a good job of talking about or asking the question, are we talking about existing structures where there needs to be a certain relief when in these larger existing structures that are changing occupancy or whatever the case, and or is the intent that we're looking at smaller structures and standalone structures, so forth. I had a lot of thoughts. That was a good discussion last week in the dwelling unit size. I'm going to try to bring some of those ideas forward and hope others do too for next week. But then I started asking myself, is there a way we can extend the problem down to those standalone shelters too, and talk about it in the same way of it could be sanitation, but what are the activities that need to be accomplished to frame the design problem first? My mind hasn't quite figured out how we extrapolate that to within an existing structure. I think they're in my mind, they seem like two pretty different problems. And so I think the group needs to decide, are we addressing both of those problems, or are we going to narrow in on one as opposed to here?
Hey, I'm sorry I was late. I'm at the ICC meeting here. I just got out of a meeting, so I'm hoping I was able to make quorum.
Yep.
So.
Thank you, Hoyt.
Well,
Welcome.
we're still shy on quorum by 1 seat.
Oh,
Josh here also?
Well, no,
With
Josh did shift it, but we had the alternate here for
Gotcha.
Hoyt's seat.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'll stop there, but let somebody else jump in. Go ahead, Josh.
I like this idea of trying to identify what the minimum standards we're trying to achieve are, and considering it in light of what is a better circumstance than being on the street. I think that's a good approach. And if I would throw out just an initial idea for conversation, I would think some of those things would, obviously be around life safety. So sanitation, egress, and structural within certain limitations, depending on how temporary things are. I think those are the things that could potentially take a situation to a more dangerous place. So say we reduced egress requirements too much, and there's a fire that breaks out and people aren't able to effectively evacuate the building. That's arguably a less safe condition that we've created, and that doesn't really address the problem. Likewise, as Steve mentioned with sanitation, if you didn't have a sanitation facility and people are left to, figure it out, obviously we can't allow that. That would be a less safe situation. And my last example is, if we're having a building that is going to be permanently available for temporary emergency, and I realize I'm making this a little complicated, but we wouldn't want to have a building that's always available to be used for temporary use and lower the overall building standards that we would have. Say you get 50 people in there and there's a seismic event, or we didn't require them to reevaluate roof for heavy snow loads, or whatever the case may be, and we have a failure. Well, that's worse than if we let people be dispersed. If we collect them together and put them in a dangerous spot, that's a problem. And I kind of like where Steve's starting with this, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I like looking at this from the standpoint of how are we bettering the situation over what it is? And certainly, heat, sanitation, and a means to exit, and that shelter needs to be stable. I think those are a good set of goals to start with. I'm curious if other people have things that should be added to that list or counterpoints to some of those items.
Thank you, Josh. It sounds to me though like we have to agree on whether we're building up a solution or taking obviously the existing code and reducing down and providing relief in certain areas, and we need to identify those areas of relief.
Hey, Dustin,
Yes, sir.
can you zoom out just a little bit? You have it really blown up high, and I can't see everything, the other stuff. You guys, sorry I came in late. So on this proposal, if you don't mind, just just a real quick thing. Is this for emergency stuff or is this for?
This is temporary emergency shelters day.
Yeah, so one of the things on temporary emergency shelters, and I work on this for ICC too, and we've even done this in Tacoma. I just want to give you this. We had to do for homeless people during the winter time, we had to do temporary shelters. I've also my experience in Turkey doing temporary shelters for after an earthquake and stuff. The one thing that should always be put into these temporary social things is you should always have in there somehow approved by the building official. Because they're the ones that are going to be looking at some of that stuff that I was hearing earlier by Todd, some of the life safety issues. If you also look in the IEBC, International Existing Building Codes, they have some provisions that you don't have to bring things all the way up to the code. They have it where you have different safety factors. I mean, I'll give you an example. They change loadings, right? Periodically in the structural codes, loadings get modified. What is it, a live load now? I'm going top of my head. I'm only have my laptop here. They've gone from to a much higher live load in certain cases, like 150 pounds per square foot. When at one time it was smaller. So I do think the one thing on this, I think, limiting existing buildings, a lot of this stuff should be approved by a building official in certain ways because they're the experts on making sure they get all the life safety issues addressed with. And I just don't see that in here and what I'm looking at right now. So.
Okay. Ardell, do you want to go first?
Sure. I agree with Hoyt. I think that I do like the safety inspection. So putting it on the engineer may or may not be appropriate for a nonprofit to hire an engineer and depending on the timing, right? So what we have as a requirement for our shelters is that there's a walkthrough by SDCI staff, either a reviewer or inspector, and somebody from the fire marshal's office. And so that joint walkthrough is to identify any safety issues in the building. And I know in talking with the building official in Portland, that's the same approach that they took as well. And so, last week I talked about how there's a lot of different variations of what's temporary, like what Hoyt mentioned around extreme weather. And sort of then there's this other like, well, no, this is actually an ongoing temporary shelter to be used on a regular basis for interim housing as an emergency measure. And again, going back to this is residential. So our primary focus in those walkthroughs is to look at egress. We're looking for 2 exits, that it's near grade, if it can be, right? It's not like sort of tucked away in some hidey hole of the basement storage area of a church. There's lighting, there's signs, there's clear exit paths, the same as like a fire inspector would, just on a assembly exiting, review. We'll look for carbon monoxide detection and smoke alarms. Like those are relatively inexpensive things to add by a nonprofit operation. We're looking for the fire department's looking for fire extinguishers, a fire safety plan by the nonprofit provider. That again, in general, these would have awake and alert staff throughout the time that people are sleeping. And that's what's really serving as your notification to the residents as they are sleeping in case of an emergency. And so it's sort of the way we approach it is sort of like a modified fire watch. It's not as robust. I wouldn't say it meets the full fire watch provisions, but it's the staff are expected to be awake and alert and monitoring the space on a regular basis throughout the evening. And those are sort of operational standards, right? Like, and then there's just, besides the supervision, there's removing hazards. So is there smoking? Is there commercial, like prohibiting smoking, prohibiting commercial cooking? And those may not be appropriate to put into a code, but just kind of from our standpoint for these buildings that are not necessarily designed for residential use, those are the things that we're looking for to allow that temporary shelter occupancy. That's it. Thanks.
So Ardell and Hoyt, so thank you for that. So if a lot of this seems surgical at the local level, what value, besides that we're being told to do it, what value is there on a statewide effort? Is it consistency? Is it something that local jurisdictions do feel they need a little bit of guidance on? I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are.
I could give you my thoughts if you
Please.
don't mind.
Sorry,
Okay.
Josh, jumping in front of you, but
Oh, yeah. Well, the one thing, Todd, the local jurisdiction knows their area better than anybody else. They should, because they work there. They know the different life safety issues. They know certain things that they need to make sure. They also know what their capacity of their fire department is. Now, if you go around the state, different fire departments have different capacities. Some of them are 100% volunteer, and some of them are very robust fire departments. What's nice about getting involved with the building official, they know that stuff. Most jurisdictions assigns a building official, and they're able to do that. And in my experience, coming from design and then coming into the code review enforcement, that's one of the things that doesn't always get looked at as closely. And that's why I think it's important in this RCW to somewhere get in there, when I say building official, most jurisdictions assigns a building official. They may not be a certified building official, but they at least have a building official. There's someone that has to make a final decision. And that's the person you want to get involved because they know the area much better than other places. That's what I'm trying to get across. And the main thing that the code is life safety. There's a lot of life safety stuff that you could really put, maybe getting someone after a disaster could cause a problem. We have a liquid natural gas facility in Tacoma on the waterfront. Okay, let's say a natural disaster came in. Let's say a tsunami came in and hit that, and then someone says, "Oh, I'm going to put." And then there's other damage for other places, and then all of a sudden someone says, "Oh, I'm going to put temporary housing right here." Obviously, the local building official will be able to know, even though the engineer may have said everything's fine or the mechanical engineer says everything's fine, adequate venting, the local building official should have a say in this to make sure life safety is definitely met. And that's what I'm trying to get to. And I apologize for not getting any more examples, but if I had to think about this a little bit longer, I would be able to. I mean, here at the code hearings, we've been doing long hours. So it's, I'm just giving my 2 cents that it's important to have the building official be involved. And in addition, I know the fire marshal is already going to be involved, but the building official should also be involved there because they could also say, you know what, I'm going to give this decision to our fire marshal for FYZ. That I pick the building official knows the area 100%, and I also think they're the ones that coordinate life safety on a global scale compared to a micro scale. And hopefully that made sense.
okay, thank you, Hoyt. Okay, let's come back to it. Josh, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna say with the conversation going around, one thing that I think might be important is we may need tiers for our situations. So there's a difference between what maybe Hoyt was discussing with the efforts he saw in Turkey after an earthquake. That's an immediate, unexpected, unanticipated response to a disaster. That should have less strict requirements than, say, planning for inclement weather. That's another tier. And maybe the furthest zoomed out tier is this is a facility that's intended to serve as an emergency shelter as time goes on it. If we're defining those buildings as still under temporary emergency shelter, and like Ardell's brought up, these converted buildings or nonprofits and churches and things that are converting it, that might have a little bit stricter standard because you're not responding to an immediate urgent need. You're responding to a planned solution. And I don't know exactly where those would be. I'm curious what the group thinks, but I feel like we might need to define some of those tiers to make sure we're keeping things relatively appropriate. And then one other thing, just in response to Hoyt, I agree. Of course, we want building officials involved. I think everyone's head is in the mind of this goes to a building department. So definitely let's get that language in there so that's covered. It's a very good point, Hoyt. But yeah, I think we all definitely agree that this is going to be something that requires a permit, right? And if I'm wrong, if people feel different, please let me know. But I imagine there's some kind of permit we're discussing for this. And maybe that's where we need to talk.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Go ahead, Ardell, please.
Josh is absolutely right. The level of requirements changes based on the duration that people are staying there. If we have extreme weather, that's a potential 1 week to 2 week thing. We're opening up City Hall, or we're opening up the Seattle Center buildings for a temporary use, and the primary thing we're looking for is a sprinkled building, and then that's and then oversight, and then clear egress. Those buildings generally already have the sanitation facilities that there was a concern about earlier. The sort of longer stay ones are these ones that might need more criteria around them. Same thing for an emergency response after a seismic event. There's this like acute need immediately for housing. That's opening up. We had that during COVID for some community centers had to open up for shelter, kind of out of the gate. And that, again, you're looking for spaces that are better, that are sprinkled and that have, that are potentially already designed from a structural standpoint for higher occupant loads. From the legislation, I think going back to Todd, your question around what's the value that this can bring, I think it is. I think we looked at it last week. It's all of the above, right? It seems like they really wanted to capture sort of the full swath when they threw in the small independent structures, the encampments, tiny house villages. They've got a lot of different names. So you might see a tent encampment. You might see that's sanctioned, or you might see tiny villages that are sanctioned. And what is the difficulty around those is complying with the residential code, and should they? And this is the language that various building officials across the country have different versions of this exemption in 1927 or 42, and are using it to provide some flexibility around these encampments. And that may be some of the ask here. Like I said, we mentioned that pallet shelter was one of the other, and modular construction is some of the immediate response potentially to an event where you have to, you think about FEMA housing, like that's quickly set up, right? What standard does that need to meet? And is that part of what this is looking for? There's no guidance on that, right? And so the different jurisdictions are taking a different approach to that.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. And that's what I'm wondering is, and I know I'm a broken record, and tell me to, to stop raising this kind of question, but to me, that's what I want to understand, like the performance levels is not that it's performance-based design, but that we know what the objective is in these different categories. We know what that performance expectation is, given those different, all of those variables, so that then we have kind of a consistent design problem for that more surgical, local solution. Or am I going too far in trying to define the problem like that we're having this, that's one of the values that we can create as a statewide group? Because I don't know yet what we're designing to. Because in one end we're saying we already have codes in place to address all this, and we need to start to subtract out certain areas of relief. Or we go the other direction and we say, here's the criteria we're trying to design to, and the local jurisdiction can have some consistency in responding to that the best they know how.
I can give you my 2 cents.
Please.
That's why I think whatever we finally decide how you want to get this in there, like you got a limit to an existing building under municipal blah blah blah. Just adding the one thing in there, building official approval. you can leave it at that. I think you could leave it at just that level because technically by the code, someone assigns a building official, whoever that may be. It doesn't have to be a certified building official, but at least you're getting someone that knows the area very well, knows the conditions. They should be if a building official feels uncomfortable with it, my experience around the state of Washington, they'll go to the fire official and say, hey, do you think this is okay? That's what I'm trying to say is, I believe this is important to get into it, limits to an existing building, all this stuff. There somehow has to be in there where there's an approval process by it rather than just a blanket statement. The other thing you say, heating system functional as reviewed by a mechanical engineer to include attic provisions for ventilations. I could say that's great. Usually you'd put it as a licensed engineer, licensed professional engineer, because they're required area of their practice. I believe a mechanical engineer is the right one to be in there, but I do think there's professional engineers. They don't actually give you a specific endorsement for mechanical engineers. They give it as a professional engineer, and you got to practice in your area of expertise. So there's certain things in there. I mean, however we get in this RC 1927, and I'm sorry to be redundant, it's just there somehow has to be in there the building official has to approve it. So whatever it is,
Okay, Hoyt. I mean, that helps. I hear a lot of the authority and enforcement piece, which I think is critical. And I think I would guess there's a lot of agreement on that. I guess I'm not quite yet hearing what is that official evaluating to?
Okay, so I could tell you that on my experience, what I'd be evaluating too. One, I would be making sure there might be a fire watch I'd put on there because of XYZ based on the number. Oh, Ardell already raised her hand. I should let her speak. Sorry, Ardell, I didn't mean to jump in. I just saw your hand go up.
Okay.
So,
Okay, it can be a dialogue, but
yeah, it's
That's
fine.
fine.
Let her do it.
You finished. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. You could do a fire watch that's on there, right? Is one thing. That we actually had some emergency shelters, the homeless in Tacoma we had here, and we put up tents. One of the things we made sure they had adequate heating, for example, because it was in the cold things. We also made sure we had fire watch. We had kind of a fire watch we had fire extinguishers made sure it was spread out around the tent city. And these were people that were homeless. So we're trying to get them out of the weather. It's in the wintertime. So we had certain requirements that we set up, but that was discussion with Sue Kaufman, she's retired now from the city of Tacoma, but Sue Kaufman and I talked about a lot of stuff to basically talk about life safety issues. So one of the things you say in there, you're right, poses no threat to human life, safety, or health. It really should be human life safety. It's not just safety, it's really a life safety issue we looked at. Health is, I'm fine with that, but I'm just saying those are the things that need to be addressed, and I'm sure Ardell could elaborate more on that, so.
okay. Thank you, Hoyt. Go ahead, Ardell.
I think you asked the question, it's sort of how do we approach this problem? If I do it from a performance standpoint, right? Like, am I saying egress needs to be out of the door, out within 2 minutes, 1 minute? Like, what is that performance? And I think, Todd, the challenge has been, and we've been regulating shelters since I started at the city, right? Listen, well before me, Tom Kinsman days, and the conversation has continuously gone with, they are a residential occupancy, but if I treat them as a residential occupancy, they're afforded a pretty restrictive need for sprinklers and potentially a fire alarm. And that's what you're trying. That's why I was saying, but what do we look at to replace sprinklers and a fire alarm, or when is it okay to not have those systems? What makes it okay? And that's the performance, right? And so we're looking for a space that is easy to exit, that I have notification, and that's not necessarily with, so what's advanced notification? That's the carbon monoxide and the smokes. It's also STEF. What is fast egress? Well, that's within one level to grade. That's I've got 2 ways to go. They're clear. It may not be a compliant egress window. I know I've been in a space where I've said, oh, these aren't great, but you're at grade. And you know, you could pop somebody up and out, right? It's interior finishes, right? Am I in a theater that has like, you know, combustible curtains? Like, so what are the, so each space has its own story. But there's some sort of basic things that you're replacing around residential sleeping requirements that and it's exiting, safe exiting and notification. That's from my, that's sort of the 2 things that come to mind immediately from a fire and a threat to human life. And then from health, it's again having the sanitation facilities available, and that can be portables. Like we've had them with porta potties. We've allowed trailers. We've allowed you know, where we've kind of pushed it is like, well, then is there still assembly? You know, how is this space being used? Is it just for sleeping, or is there also an assembly space? And that may be a little different from that we treat a little differently from the requirement standpoint. We do, if they trigger assembly, we require that to be compliant for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And as I start to call in people here, I think that's where I'm trying to unpack is take something less about life safety, but you know, about safety, energy. Do we care at all?
We waive that
code, right? I mean, but I mean,
no,
I'm trying
don't
to
need
go
energy code.
I'm going to an extreme saying that's not what's important. I mean, it's an emergency. We're not in the state of normal. We're in a state of survival, a state of so forth, you know. So is the important thing that we're maintaining a temperature between 50 degrees and 90 degrees or whatever it is, you know, what is that expectation that we're providing, regardless of how we provide that heat, that so forth.
Yeah,
That's
we
what's-
wave energy too. I just want to say that, just so you know.
But I bring it up because I think we all agree on that, but we are not stating that anywhere, right? That
Yeah.
we're trying to achieve comfort, warmth, whatever, not energy efficiency. So, okay, I'll let others talk. Jay.
Yes, thank you, Todd. I think it's important to be able to establish all that parameters. I think it's important that we identify the occupant load for these spaces, wherever it might be, whether it's an arena or it's an old office building, whether it's a lobby of some hotel that becomes an emergency shelter for some reason. For example, I'm thinking of something like Katrina, where there's a flood that occurred overnight and they had to house people. So, and then you look for a space and you're like, okay, how many people can I shelter here? And I think that is important to identify. So is it 1 per 30 square feet? Is it so when you have a building, you already know how many square feet does this building have, and then you equate that to how many people can I shelter here, and then that helps you think about, okay, how much sanitation do I need? What plumbing fixtures are needed for here for people to be able to sleep, eat, and sanitize. So, and then you start thinking about the next step. What else are we providing other than sleeping, eating, and sanitizing? Is it are we thinking about privacy and security? Then we start stepping up those requirements, parameters. And I think we should start with occupant load.
Okay. Good points, Jay. Okay, Tim.
I'm gonna basically echo what Shay just said. That is exactly what I wanted to discuss, is establishing occupant loads for the spaces. And then using that as our guiding light when we're determining if, you know, the space has to be sprinkled. When do you make that decision? Well, if you want to house more than 50 people in there, then it should be sprinkled, you know, or whatever those thresholds that we hit are. And then, you know, exiting requirements, do we mimic everything that's equivalent to an R occupancy? I think for the extreme weather scenarios, we do something way less, but then when we do something that is going to be more permanent, we have to do something more. So anyway, establishing those occupant loads and how many people we're allowing to go into those spaces, I think is really probably our first step in developing this regulation.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. Okay, Josh.
And I'm going to throw out there, if Ardell wants to go first, that would be fine. I've been taking some notes here and putting together the roughest of framework from this conversation, and I'm hoping I could steal the screen share and see if maybe we can start getting to a little bit of an outline of what we're expecting, because I think we're circling around some good points here. But before I launch into a thing, Ardell, if you'd like to go, by all means.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I
go
do.
ahead.
I just wanted to, again, I'm trying not to like just make that like, here's what we do and you guys should do it, because I don't think that's how we want to. We do have guidance around like those thresholds, and the things that that we looked at to establish those was not just the occupant load, but also the duration. So if you are, I think we've talked about sort of this sliding, like if it's a week or if it's a month, that it may not trigger as much. But if you're talking about, I've got, during COVID we had, and well, all planning was kind of waived at the time, but we had sort of these unknowns, right? Where Salvation Army needed to move into space, right? And it was, well, that's a lot longer. What can you give us? And so our thresholds were sort of 20 or fewer beds. We don't really set any limits on seasonality, and that would allow us to go into these alternate rules. And this is like, what are the thresholds before we trigger it? No, this is a change of occupancy. The other ones are like 50 to less than 50 beds. That's one of our sweet spots. Unlimited hours of operation. And then between 50 and 100, like once it has sprinklers, it's allowed to do a lot more. Yeah, that's it. I just want to offer a couple thresholds, but also flag that duration should be part of it, not just occupant load.
So that's really valuable. So Josh, as we throw it back to you, so occupancy duration, does severity of the current event situation ever come into play? I mean, I know that's kind of a relative, like if we're in the middle of an earthquake and so forth, that's a different consideration than, or bad air quality or something like that, right? I don't know how to frame that, but I'll throw it over to Josh for the answers.
Yeah, for the answers, boy, that's a lot of pressure. But I think we're all starting to circle around something. This is kind of exciting. I think we're getting towards something that makes sense here. So, Ardell, I'm definitely interested in some of those SDCI standards of how we might adapt some of this or better define this, because I literally was typing this while we were talking, so forgive grammar, spelling, etc. But I was kind of breaking into, maybe I should say, immediate disaster relief, earthquakes, inflammations, some other extreme event that needs to displace a lot of people. I think Hoyt brought up in a previous meeting, the temporary rapid shelters, things like the pallet shelters are typically governed by L&I, and I think that's probably an appropriate course because those are built in advance. They're mobile structures. Maybe we need some rules about how they can be placed and how they can be used, but I'm curious what folks think of that. In terms of existing buildings, if we're in immediate disaster, kind of going to Tim's point, bare minimum standards for egress and fire life safety, minimum sanitation standards. I'm sure we could expand that list, but there's a bare minimum we would want to establish that could be quickly and easily identifiable to the building department. They don't need other professionals to look at it. They want to say, hey, we're reducing some of these because right now their alternative is dire. Then there's expected inclement weather and near-term events. Say you have several weeks notice and you're preparing churches or other buildings in advance of an anticipated increase in need. Existing buildings approved by local jurisdiction walk through as a currently compliant building for structural. So nothing, you don't need to get a structural engineer, but you need somebody, if you have a few weeks notice, should at least be able to look at it and say, hey, this is a currently compliant building. There's no unpermitted additions or modifications that we can immediately tell. There's no obvious red flags or significant failures. And then maybe a slightly increased standard for egress, fire, life safety, and sanitation. Again, this list could get longer. Or if this is a new temporary structure, say a tent that we're putting up, some kind of large scale tent or some other structure that's not going to be permanent, but is a temporary shelter, would that need to be addressed? Would those requirements change? Because I could see that. And I realize I'm throwing a lot of things out at once, but I'll leave this up on the screen. And then a permanent structure, which is designed for or modified to be a temporary emergency shelter, dare I say, use and occupancy. I think that would probably be largely the current building standards if it's not in response to an immediate disaster, but going to be an asset to handle those disasters. Maybe some relief to encourage construction and economy, particularly around energy code and other things with existing buildings. So I think the IEBC would cover a lot of that. Maybe there's some exemption to the change of occupancy that we can make it to where they don't have to upgrade all systems for the same purpose. And then I was taking down, just in our last few conversations that didn't really get captured up here, other considerations I think we want to keep on our radar. Sure, the safety of occupants is improved compared to the alternative circumstance. That's coming from Steve's presentation. I think that's an amazing metric to use to kind of evaluate some of these things that are maybe somewhat subjective. Needs approval from building official, and I'm curious, does that mean this would be a permit submittal or some kind of expedited process? Hoyt and Ardell, I would love to hear what you guys have about that. Like, what regulatory process happens? Is somebody's not drafting plans and submitting for a building permit in the most extreme emergencies, and I don't know exactly what that looks like. It sounds like we were talking about maybe some provisions for relief from fire detection systems, provided there's a full-time staff, and I think that could be and or sort of situation. If you're going to have a full-time awake staff, then maybe you don't have the same fire detection requirements as you would if you're going to lock the doors and walk away. Not even sure if that's really a scenario that happens all that often, but it's something to consider. Jay was bringing up occupant load factor for this circumstance. We probably need to define a separate load that we don't necessarily have, and it seems like the SDCI documents might be a great starting point. Other things like number of washrooms, installs, are bathing facilities required? I think that has to do with duration, to your point, Ardell. So we're starting to see some categories form here. What constitutes a bed or a sleeping area? I think that's something we might need to talk about. We keep saying number of beds. Are they truly having all these beds, or do we not even care about that? Is it just space for them to be able to sleep? I think that might vary depending on the use. If we were doing a permanent building that is designed to be a temporary emergency shelter, well, maybe we should expect that they have more in the way of sleeping rooms or beds or areas as compared to an immediate relief. And then last, I just put down while we were talking a moment ago, the SDCI standards would be useful. Can we maybe comment on some of this with the remaining time we have to form the most initial outline? I'm certainly not saying this is what we do, but trying to put some words on paper to take conversation to progress that we can send off some homework assignments and think.
Okay, thanks, Josh, for laying all that out. Let's go to Tim and then Ardell.
So first off, this looks pretty good as a initial framework of something. My big thing is always kind of defining terms. So I would also just maybe add in there that we try to either we go to this idea of everything is based on duration, or we have to go to how do we declare if it's an immediate disaster relief. So is that if there's a nationally declared emergency? Because right now for inclement weather, we currently require that our county or city declares an emergency, and then we could do these inclement weather shelters. So if we could correlate those somehow, or decide whether we're going to just strictly go with duration, I think would be beneficial as well.
That's interesting. Okay. Ardell, I'm trying to think, is it and or?
Yeah, it is. Speaking to Tim's comment, yeah, there's absolutely, for the immediate disaster reliefs, we are looking for a city or county declaration, typically, but many of our counties and many of our jurisdictions have declared homelessness an emergency. Like, we've had homelessness as an emergency declaration, I think, in Seattle on the books for 10 years.
Okay, and said housing as an emergency. So
Yeah. So there's getting a little better language on that. But the only other comment, appreciate the breakdown and sort of the organization of this. That that's on the screen, but want to also add that accessibility needs to be on there. That is something that we do require for the common spaces, is how we enforce it. Same that you wouldn't require accessibility to an R3 single family, so we don't require it to the tiny homes or but into the actual encampment and to any of the restroom facilities. If they're getting a trailer, if they're getting porta potties, they're on the hook for that, from just a federal requirement. And so there's that. And then also for any, where else? From going back to the numbers, I said this last week, I really do think we need to get providers out here as part of the conversation. One of the numbers that I cited previously was 20, was based on, we had it at 12. First we had it at 8, and then we upped it to 12, and then we had it to 16 because that's within a duplex. And then the shelter providers said, but we can put 20 in a van, so give us 20. So there's just a lot of programmatic needs that shelter providers may want to weigh in on.
Okay, Josh, and we're coming in the last 9 minutes here. So
I'll make this
you can start assigning homework.
Oh, no, I'll make this really, really quick. I was just going to say, Ardell with or Hoyt, since you guys are both working in jurisdictions that face these challenges, do you have any data available that supports maybe when one of these values was too much or too little? When you had I think you said 8 people or 8 square feet per person, was it determined that, wow, this just doesn't really work? Or is there any sort of source of that? Or is the best source just the current regulations that have been informed by the past?
I think I'd rather kind of share out where we're at, and then can help walk through some of the history on the numbers and how we got there. The basis is primarily around R3.
That's
and R2 provisions.
Yeah,
Perfect.
That's exactly pretty much what we did. And I'm sorry I had to go run and get my charger. My thing was gonna die, so I had to run and get it real quick. But I'm glad you added that accessibility thing, because really that's one thing that, for whatever reason, people forget about that. And accessibility is something that does need to be looked at also. So that's the one reason why I said the building official needs to get involved. Because there's a lot of those little things that they'll end up catching. But the one thing I hope we get by the time we're done with all this, we have a very good list that is labeled that needs to be addressed. And then that'll really help, smaller jurisdictions or things like that has disasters that happen. Like I said, like Oslo, when they had the landslide, they had a lot of people that needed some emergency stuff. So hopefully we do get this done. So, and sorry I'm breathing so hard. I had to run a fairly long distance to get where my power cord was here at the hearings. So.
Appreciate that. Wait. Okay, Tim.
All right. Last comment is just in regards to the fire watch thing that we've all talked about. That's where our 20 number came from, is we require at least 2 people. And then 2 people or 1 person for every 10 people. So you might as well get approved for 20 people, even if you're not planning on having 20 people in there for as far as on-duty staff. So that could be thrown in there as a consideration.
Okay, that's a good one. Okay, so as far as homework then, I think I'm hearing we also need to do a little review of what sounds like Seattle Tacoma already has, and what other jurisdictions already can bring some to the table that we all should review. Or did I hear that incorrectly?
I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, cross-reference that with Josh, your outline here. I'm just so we can start to get ideas of what this starts to materialize as.
I could send this out if people want to comment on this, and then we have maybe a consolidated set of comments we can try to have available for our next get together, and then we can get to something that's not a, on the fly slap together outline, but something that's maybe going to better represent an anticipated, for lack of a better word, table of contents, so we can start divvying these things up and putting some real language to it.
Yeah, I think so. And just start bringing snippets of ideas and language in, and we can start to all better understand this. Thank you all. I think I personally learned a lot today. So any other suggestions, Shay?
Yes, I would just like to propose that in writing this, thank you, Josh, for doing this. Is very helpful. In writing this, that we should also think about the structure of the building code and use that as our structure in organizing this this information. Like we have the scope definitions, occupancy, and up to environment, interior environment, and all that.
I see. You're talking about the actual structure of the code.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Jay.
John,
Also,
I was going to ask if you could just send that to me, Josh, and I can forward that out to the group.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Michael.
I've been kind of quiet today, but I've been listening to everybody, and I just wanted to express that I am in strong agreement, really, with the discussions, and appreciative of everybody's comments. I think this is a good way to move this forward, and I too support this direction.
That's helpful and important. Thank you, Michael. Okay, Tim, you get the last word.
I was just hoping somebody would tell us kind of the communication element as we want to submit or give the information from our cities. Where can we upload that? Do we want to do like a live document? Can we do that? That kind of question.
So as far as a live document where like I have it posted on some sort of a SharePoint and everybody can get in and edit it, I don't have anything like that set up. So if you want to send any input from the cities direct to me or the SBCC inbox, we can get them uploaded and disseminated if we want them to send out to the group as well.
The one thing, Dustin, no, I'm sorry, the one thing, Dustin, on that, obviously our legal also went through some of our requirements and stuff like that we wanted to do during the emergency stuff, but I'm not 100% sure. I think it'd be shared with all of us because we all may have a little bit different requirements. I'm not 100% sure. Do we really want to send it out in an email to everybody or put it on the state website before we've actually worked out at least a single draft, then get input from the public? Because all of us are going to be a little bit different. So,
well, I guess if we're wanting to get some examples for people to inform their, opinions on, if we get examples of ordinance from different jurisdictions, I can put them up on our page for documents for consideration. But this document that we're looking at here, the plan is to just send it out to the tag group, not necessarily post that online. I will be working some of these topics into our topic summary spreadsheet so we can just kind of track them and sort them as appropriate. I have added some of these into what I've been going as we've been discussing, and need to add a little bit more in there, but I'm not really necessarily trying to get a big draft document out for everybody to look at just yet.
okay, thank you very much.
Okay. All right, Mike, you get the last word.
Oh, sorry, I hadn't taken my hand down.
Oh, that wasn't very dramatic.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
I could say something profound if if it would help.
That's what I was looking for. Okay. Trying to bring light to everything. Thank you everyone for the hard work today. I think we have a little bit of direction. Next week, we are scheduled next week, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
we're going
Thursday,
to
1 p.m.
the minimum dwelling unit, so we kind of get this every other week rhythm. I'm going to try really hard to join. I'll be in an airport, so I'll get Roger to see if he can, or you can elect someone to nominate someone to go pro tem here if I'm not here. So, okay. Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone, have a good rest of the day.